Hello there. So, do you remember we were talking about some approaches to teach English or to learn English? So, this is the video I told you about in my previous video, and this is the Audiolingual Method, and we will be dealing with your teaching, your ALC material just in case you are appointed to teach English in your institution, at your job, especially if you are a teacher in the armed forces. This is good for you. Why? Because you teach ALC, that's American Language Course materials. So that's why this is kind of important to you. So en el caso de que tú seas asignado a dar clases de inglés, en el video pasado te estoy explicando los diferentes approaches, los diferentes enfoques, los diferentes métodos que existieron y que existen por si tú eres asignado a enseñar inglés, a lo mejor, y quizá porque tú no quieres, no porque tú quieras, sino porque te dan la orden, la instrucción de que si sabes inglés, enseñes a tus alumnos inglés, de tal manera que no puedas hacerte a un lado. Bueno, esto te sirve. Ya vimos en el primer video los diferentes enfoques. Y recuerda que tienes que emplear un enfoque ecléctico, un método ecléctico, es decir, una combinación de todos los enfoques, de todos los métodos, de todas las propuestas, de todas las corrientes. ¿Sabes para qué? Para obtener el beneficio del aprendizaje. No necesariamente de cómo enseñes, más bien, sino cómo aprenden tus alumnos. Entonces, adáptalo. Esto es para ti si te asignaron como instructor del idioma inglés. De esta manera puedes justificar tu trabajo. Es decir, el método ALC que se enseñan en las Fuerzas Armadas es un método audiolingual que han querido y han intentado ponerle matices de comunicativo y son buenas intenciones. Sin embargo, sigue siendo Audiolingual Method, un método audiolingual. Y te lo dice. ¿Quién te lo dice? Pues obviamente tus evaluaciones, la diagnóstica, la formativa, la sumativa. Esas evaluaciones te dicen exactamente cuál es el método, cuál es la metodología. No, el método, el enfoque de tu enseñanza en el idioma inglés. Y realmente es lo que se aprende en la base aérea de Lackland, Texas, cuando tomas un curso de instructores de inglés. Esto es lo que vas a aprender. Igual y no aprendes otros métodos, porque esto es lo que les importa. ¿Sabes por qué? Aquí tengo la historia. La historia viene de parte de la Segunda Guerra Mundial, en donde necesitaban urgentemente personas que se pudieran comunicar en otros idiomas, especialmente japonés. ¿Lo recuerdas en la Segunda Guerra Mundial? Bueno, de esta manera los sometían a un tratamiento totalmente intensivo de 10 horas diarias para que fueran capaces de comprender y hablar, porque un buen escucha es un buen parlante. Esa sería una teoría. Entonces, entre más escuches, puede ser que tu capacidad, tu habilidad oral sea mejor. ¿Por qué? Porque es como si repitieras lo que un nativo te dice en su idioma. Por lo tanto, este es un justificante. ¿Sabes por qué es justificante? Porque a lo mejor tus superiores te piden resultados que realmente desconocen, y a lo mejor tú también. ¿Por qué no se dan esos resultados? ¿Por qué no al último tus alumnos no hablan como pericos? Porque precisamente o no leen como pericos, bueno, ya no como pericos, sin embargo no leen. Entonces, porque estás enseñando el método audiolingual. señor, mi señor superior, es porque estamos enseñando un método que sí da resultados, sin embargo es audiolingual, en donde se enfatiza listening, que es la habilidad de escucha, y speaking, que es la habilidad oral, de tal manera que las otras dos habilidades no se enfatizan. Entonces hay que tener en cuenta eso para tus resultados finales, ¿no? Entonces, lo que ahora quiero es, si ya te asignaron a ser un teacher, a ser un profesor de inglés en tu escuela, en tu dependencia, en tu unidad, en tu oficina, entonces, y adoptas este método, el American Language Course, es un método audiolingual con tendencias a comunicativo, te lo vuelvo a insistir. Sin embargo, tienes que tener el conocimiento de cuál es el método real que estás llevando, por qué tus estudiantes van a aprender como van a aprender y por qué tú lo debes enseñar como lo debes enseñar. Esto no es magia, todo ya tiene base en la ciencia, todo ya está investigado, no hay más allá. En este caso es audiolingual, el método es audiolingual. Te lo vuelvo a repetir, una LSPT de 100 preguntas, 60 son de audio. ¿Qué quiere decir? Que tienes un método audiolingual. ¿Sí o no? Bueno, no necesitas ser pedagogo ni doctor en educación como tu servidor, pero no tiene nada que ver, sino es simple lógica. Por lo tanto, espero te sirva. Con esto te familiarizas con el método que realmente estás enseñando y puedas justificar tu trabajo. Y eso está basado en los libros. Hay un libro por ahí que se llama Métodos de Enseñanza y donde tú busques vas a encontrar las bases, las fuentes de esto que te voy a comentar. Se me olvidó poner todas las fuentes, sin embargo, pues está totalmente investigado, no es improvisado. Y lo que sí quiero es que tú lo comprendas perfectamente. ¿Sabes por qué? Porque mi mera intención es de ayudarte a ayudar. De tal manera que si tú enseñas a tus estudiantes de la mejor manera, el resultado es bueno tanto para ti como para tus estudiantes. Y eso me alegraría mucho. Bueno, entonces empezamos y hacemos el code switching, cambiamos de código y empezamos. So let's get started. Let's see. You see, so you have the audiolingual method, right? So let's check some background. Some background. Do you remember I told you that this is during the Second World War? Well, as you have here, it was, developed from 1950s. Look at this, from the 1950s to the 1970s. So the first, kind of program for the military, it was the Army Specialized Training Program. So the ASTP. And it was especially for military guys. Then, so they, at that time, there was no founder information. And of course, you may say, in the previous period, what was, in progress? Well, it was before the Second World War. There were three methods. Look at the first one, the modified direct method approach. The second one was a reading approach, and the third one was a reading oral approach. Okay? So you see? 3 methods. But guess what? Problems with these 3 methods were the following. They lacked standardization of vocabulary or grammar, and no one could agree what was important to teach for beginning, intermediate, or advanced learner. So they were kind of lost. They basically lacked structure. You see, if you have a language lacking a structure, missing structure, so it's not complete, it's not full. So you need structure anyway. Then, as I told you, the Army Specialized Training Program was the ASTP, and started in 1942. You see? So it comes before even the Second World War. So 1942, that was the specialized training program. Then here you have the native speakers acted as an informant or as informants of the language as a linguists, as in the direct method. So it was just kind of direct method. Students and informants gradually learned a language 10 hours a day for 6 days a week. You see, this is intensive. That's why the program you are teaching, it is called, it's called intensive ALC. The ALC is intensive because you have another program which is non-intensive. Well, the one you are teaching, we are talking about the 30 or 34 books, is an intensive program. So let's see. Do you want to know the characteristics of this audiolingual method? Well, the characteristics are that the material is presented in a dialogue form. Do you remember that? Dialogues are important, are very important. Dialogue. Remember that. There is no dependence on mimicry. You remember that? I mentioned this in my previous video. Memorization of set phrases and overlearning. This is another important thing. You will depend on memorization of phrases, sentences, and overlearning. You know, they will be, your students will be tired of listening and repeating and repeating. So this is kind of overlearning. Structural patterns are taught using repetitive drills. That's what I told you, repetitive drills. So you repeat and repeat and repeat. Your students. You see, when I say you, so I'm referring to your students. Your students have to repeat. That's why are taught using repetitive drills. So your students repeat and repeat and repeat, not only words. We are talking about structural patterns in such a way that you are teaching past tense, so they will be repeating after you past tense, sentences in past tense, sentences, a dialogue. So, and I told you why I wrote backwards. You know why? Because usually we have very long sentences in which you have to divide into smaller chunks of the sentence. You know why? Just for students to remember the long sentence. They won't be able to repeat if they are really long. So in chunks. But guess what? You begin from the very end of the sentence and they repeat from the very end. They repeat after you. For example, I told you Betty was playing in the garden with his brothers and sisters. So you begin, say, with her brothers and sisters, and then the students repeat, with her brothers and sisters. Was playing in the garden. Then so on and so forth. Then when they have the full sentence, they would be able to repeat the whole sentence, but from the end to the beginning of the sentence. So that's why it's backwards. And guess what? Speech is above written expression. So they are more kind of interested in speech oral than in written. Okay. There is little or no grammatical explanation. Look at this. Little or no grammatical explanation. That's why I explain the 30 books in my channel. I'm explaining in Spanish the 30 books, vocabulary and grammar. You know why? Because if you have true beginners, which is my case, true beginners, very basic learners. So they open their books in the middle and they understand nothing. So that's why I wanted to help them. And when they open their books, they at least they have already understood the grammar and the vocab, and they would be able to go immediately to their exercises and to complete their exercises. And they won't be, kind of wasting time trying to guess the grammar explanation. But guess what? That's one of the characteristics of this audiolingual method. There's no explanation of grammar. That's why I was kind of interested in helping. And that's in my channel for students who are really true beginners. Great importance to pronunciation. Look at this. To pronunciation, remember that pronunciation. We are not talking about accent. I told you in one video, just to promote your learning, you don't have to worry about your accent. You don't have to worry about your accent. My accent, for example, is Latin, is Mexican accent. You know why? They say, I told you in one of the videos, so when you ask why I'm not speaking just like an American or just like an Briton, just because I'm not an American, I'm not a Briton, I'm a Latin and a Mexican. So you have to speak your English with this kind of accent, but that's proud. You see why? Because this only shows the courage you have to speak another language. So don't worry about it. Don't worry about your accent. Of course, you need to, go kind of making it more smooth and easy, but this is over time. But what you have to worry about is the pronunciation. And pronunciation in this audiolingual method is important. You know why? Because the only thing you are doing is repetition. I mean, your students, okay? Your students will be repeating and repeating and repeating in such a way that when they realized they are pronouncing just like a baby when he or she begins, pronouncing his or her own language. Well, very little use of the mother tongue is done by teachers. So very little. You see, very little. I told you, very little. That means it doesn't say no use of mother tongue. So you can use your mother tongue, but judiciously. You remember that? It's another video. I explain you why. So in this case, you can use L1 in an L2 classroom, but judiciously. So it's not just because you wanted to speak Spanish in an English class. Okay? So you have to be very smart to do this. How and when to use one word in Spanish, for example, for your learners. Well, let's get the ball rolling. Based on this audiolingual method is based on behaviorism. You know why? Because they are doing what you are doing. They are repeating, and then they have a kind of maybe a reinforcement. Of course, they have a positive and negative reinforcement. You say, oh, thank you very much, good job, and something like that. So, and language is automatic, okay, based on behaviorism. So, language is automatic. Why? Because of repetition. Automatic language formation, you see? So, automatic language formation through drill and practice. So, it becomes automatic. This formation of language is, kind of automatic due to drilling and practicing. The main objective is to acquire accurate pronunciation. I tell you, it's based on habit formation. Look at this. Habit formation. You see, so your language, your English, it will become a habit. You know, saying good morning, how are you guys doing? How are you guys doing? How are you guys doing? So it becomes a habit through repetition and drill. Ear training for speaking proficiency, of course, you have some training for your for your listening skill. So you end up becoming a proficient speaker. It focuses on listening and speaking. You see, listening and speaking. You see, no reading, no writing. So that's the audiolingual. Don't lose track of it. Memorization of phrases and sentences, I told you. No clear grammatical explanation, I told you. So let's continue with characteristics. Language laboratory is helpful. Do you remember the laboratory for this audiolingual method? Okay, so you have a lab in your class, in your school. You have a laboratory, and it's very helpful. You know why? Because you have hours and hours of listening, listening and listening and listening and listening. So if you are a teacher of the ALC material, you will notice that you have lots of hours of listening, lots. Importance given to listening and speaking, of course. Again, this is listening and speaking. But of course, as every other method, it's got its limitations. For example, there is not an equal, there's not equal importance to the four skills, only listening and speaking. Is teaching center, you know what? This is important for you to know. This is teacher center. Why? Because when you have a supervision and the supervisor comes, ask you, why are you the guy who are always speaking or doing things? Because it is teacher centered, because it's an audiolingual method. If you want to change this kind of focus, we need another method, like the communicative, like the silent way, maybe Suggestopedia, but not audiolingual. Okay, these will cause you problems. Okay, that's why you have to combine it with other methods, other approaches. Remember that methods are included in the approaches. So it's teaching centered, it's mechanical. Why mechanical? It becomes mechanical because you have practice, drilling, and memorization. Okay, that's why it becomes mechanical. See the audiolingual. We are talking about the audiolingual. Do you remember the FODA in Spanish, the SWOT? In this case, which means strengths, weaknesses. What else? Do you remember? Kind of, opportunities and threats. You remember that? In Spanish is FODA. Fortalezas, debilidades, oportunidades y ¿cómo está? Exactly like here. Y amenazas and threats. So SWOT. Okay, let's see. What about the strengths of this method? Well, it's automatic learning without stopping. You see, automatic learning without stopping. So that means that you, through your practice, through your drilling, you learn your language. No stopping. It is emphasized in sentence production, emphasized in sentence production. So you will be producing not only words, you will be producing, your students. Whenever I say you, consider that I'm talking to your students. So you will be producing sentences. As for example, how are you guys doing? All these things. How are you today? and so on and so forth. So sentence production, and not word production. What about the weaknesses? Of course, it's got some. Too much repetition. Too much repetition. You know what I mean by repetition? So the class as a whole repeats and repeats and repeats. Then they repeat individually. So that's why it becomes tiring for some people. Errors were not necessarily to be avoided at all costs. So not to be avoided usually, not necessary to be avoided, the errors. Errors, no problem, no problem. They will be corrected even by themselves. That's why through their mechanization, they will correct what they are saying wrong. Okay, so no meaningful learning, no aprendizaje significativo. You remember that Vygotsky and all those people. Well, now opportunities. What about the opportunities? Takes advantage of pronunciation skills, of course, pronunciation skills. So you might not know what a word means, but you will know the proper pronunciation of it. Most part of the lesson is given in the target language. You see, most part of the lesson in the target language. What about the threats? Of course, we have some threats. It must develop language competence better. You know why? Because usually they don't have competence in the four skills. Material must be oriented to the students and not only to the teachers. You remember that it's teaching center? Well, what about the goal? The goal is the use of language communicatively. Do you remember the Second World War? What they needed is communication. You see, but very quickly it was an intense. They were intensive courses. What are the principles? What's the view of language? Well, languages have unique systems. That's what they think. That they have unique systems, and we know that. Culture is contextualized. Through context, you learn culture. No students' feelings addressed. So you see, you are not, kind of affecting the feelings of students. Students' native language, interference. Of course, there will be interference. You know what this interference means? For example, when they're speaking English, but then, you know, once in a while, they come out with a Spanish word that they don't know, or even sentence. So that's the interference of their own language. One more principle is grammar is inducted. Okay, there's no explanation, exposed at least, explanation of grammar. One more principle is the evaluation. There are no formal tests. They are not really formal. You are testing your students during class. And what about the classroom management? The teacher's role is important because the teacher becomes a model, orchestral leader. Why? Because you have followers, which are your students. And the student's role is imitator, the follower. And we continue with the classroom management. There is interaction between or among students. There's interaction as in the communicative. So they work in pairs, or they work in trios, or in group as a whole, and the vocabulary is contextualized. This is beautiful. They are not learning, lists, endless lists of verbs, vocabulary. So they learn it in context. The order of presentation of your language, in this case L2 which is English. They have listening, the skills, reading and writing. That's the order of the presentation. The students' errors are avoided. You know why? Because they are repeating. So sometimes they don't commit these kind of serious mistakes because they are just repeating what you're saying as a teacher. So that's why, and then it becomes a habit. And this is important. I wanted to share with you, you know what? If you are teaching your students with the ALC materials, with the Método de ALC, so if you are teaching them, you have some drills to practice with them, with your students. And you have to, because why? Because you have the audiolingual method. So you have to practice these drills: repetition, inflection, replacement, restatement, completion, transposition, expansion, contraction, transformation, integration, rejoinder, and restoration. And of course, you may say that doesn't tell me much. Well, I wanted to explain a little bit what each is. For example, repetition. Of course, the student repeats an utterance aloud. This utterance is allowed as soon as he has heard it. So repeats as soon as he hears it. Okay? So he does this without looking at the printed text. This is important. You know why? Because they don't have to read. They don't have to read. They are just repeating what you are saying, although they have it printed in their texts. They don't have to look at it. They have just to repeat. Sound and form is important as form and order. Example, of course, you don't have to lose track of the order of the sentence. For example, you say, I used to know him. So the students have to repeat, I used to know him. Once you teach them that sometimes the H is not pronounced, instead of saying him, is him only, to know him. But that's another point. But if they say used to know him, that's perfect. No problem. Then, inflection. You know what inflection is? One word in an utterance appears in another form when repeated. You know, one word. Let's see. For example, you say as a teacher, I bought the ticket. The student or the students repeat or say, I bought the tickets. Then you say, he bought the candy. Instead of he, you change and she bought the candy. You see? Tickets, he, she, and so on and so forth. And they will realize that they are learning through habit and repetition and all these skills. Replacement. Let's see. Replacement. What replacement is? Well, or what is replacement? Well, one word is replaced by another. One word. Example, he bought this house. He bought this house cheap. So he bought it. He bought it cheap. You see the replacement? Then Helen left early. She left early. In this case, they are replacing what? Of course, the nouns and the with or for the subject pronouns, like this and like this. Okay. So that's replacement. Okay? That's what you will be doing in your classroom if you are a teacher. Then restatement. Look at this restatement. The student rephrases an utterance and addresses it to someone else. You see? So they are talking among themselves according to the instructions. For example, tell him to wait for you. So they will say, he or she will say, wait for me. Ask her, how old is she? How old she is. Ask her how old she is. So how old are you? You see? This is a restatement. You just tell them what to do. And then you can assign a student to give this instruction to another student, and the other student will be doing what he or she told him to do. Well, it's up to you. It's up to you. Your imagination in the classroom. Completion. What about completion? Well, the student hears an utterance that is complete, except for one word. So one word is missing. Then repeats the utterance in completed form. For example, I'll go my way and you go yours. And you go yours. So the missing is this. Okay? So they have to complete. That's why it's completion. And this is kind of logic when they say, okay, I'll go my way and you go yours. Especially if you just check these pronouns, the possessives. Transposition. Well, what about transposition? Well, this is a change in word order. When it is necessary, when a word is added. You see, when you add a word and then it is necessary to make a change, just like the example. If you say, I'm hungry, and you have in parentheses, usually you have this in parentheses, so am I. You see, this is transposition. I'm hungry, and they say, now do one with so am I. So they are exercises, they are in your books, and they are kind of easy, not so easy, but they are kind of, because you have the examples. Then you have the expansion. Expansion, when a word is added, of course, it takes a certain place in the sentence. Example, I know him. Hardly. So I hardly know him. You see, hardly comes, and then, of course, you know what's the beauty of this method is that they don't know how, they don't know when, write correctly in the correct position the adverb. This adverb, they put it in the correct order. Why didn't put it here? I know him hardly, or hardly I know. Why? Well, that's why errors, usually they correct these errors by themselves. Why? Because they are repeating and repeating and repeating in such a way that when they render this sentence, they say, I hardly know him, I hardly know him. So in this case, the hardly, it's already there. They don't have to think even where it is placed, just like in other methods. Because when I teach other methods, they will be asking, where should I put this? And then you have to explain the rule of the position of the adverbs. In this case, they just repeat and repeat and repeat, and they don't know how, they don't know when, but they are speaking correctly. Contraction. Well, a single word stands for a phrase or a clause. A single word replaces a phrase or a clause. Example, put your hand on the table. Okay, so put your hand there. You see, this there replaced on the table. Then, they believe that the world is flat. You see, all this sentence, it was clause, it was replaced by it. You see, they believe it, and that's it. That's the contraction. They contracted, replacing, you see, a sentence or a phrase. Well, transformation. A sentence is transformed by being made negative or interrogative, or through changes in tense, mood, voice, aspect, or modality. You see, there's a change right here. You see? Well, let's check that change. For example, he knows my address. Negative. He doesn't know my address. Does he know my address? This is interrogative. Then an affirmative with another, just like here, it's used to. He used to know my address. I don't know now. Maybe he doesn't know my address now, but he used to. You remember used to? Well, he used to know my address. You see, this is the transformation. You are transforming negative, interrogative. So with the aspect, modality, you see. Then integration is two separate utterances are integrated into one. So look at these two. They must be honest. This is important. Well, they say, please integrate them. So you integrate them like this. It is important that they be honest. You see, an anticipatory it and that clause. So it is important that they be honest. You see, that's the integration. Rejoinder. Well, remember the rejoinder. For example, the student makes an appropriate rejoinder to a given utterance. He's told in advance to respond in one of the following ways. For example, they say, be polite. And they say, thank you. And then the other one, you're welcome. Then answer the question. So, what's your name? They respond, my name is Smith. That's a rejoinder. Agree, for example. He's following us. I think you're right. For example, when you agree, you answer the question, you are polite. Okay? So that's a rejoinder. Okay, let's see. Restoration. What about restoration? You restore. Okay, the student is giving a sequence of words that have been called from a sentence, but still hear its basic meaning. This is important. You still hear its basic meaning. He used these words with a minimum of changes and additions to restore the sentence to its original form. So what you have to do is to restore. You see, they divided, so you restore using minimum of changes. Okay? So don't try to make a story of this. Just a sentence. For example, students waiting bus. So the students are waiting for the bus. You see? This, you have to add this, you have to add this, and you have to add this. You see? And this is sometimes these exercises are difficult. Sometimes. What about the advantages of this Audiolingual method? So they give you a better fluency. Why? Why better fluency? Because they repeat, and sentences, not only words, sentences in this way. So of course their fluency improves. Then, no boring grammar. You see, that's what I told you. They don't have any explanation, at least exposed explanation of grammar. So that's why it's not so boring with grammar, but you know what? It's boring with audio skills. The audio, hours and hours of audio or listening, that they get bored. But that's the way they learn. They learn in this audiolingual method. And this is a key, okay? Listening. So that's why no grammar. Vocabulary in context. So I told you, vocabulary is in context. It's not word. Learning endless lists of words, so just vocabularies in context. Then no bad habits. You know why? I told you. No bad habits, because they are repeating what you're repeating, what you as a teacher are saying or repeating, just for them to say or repeat. So that's why there's no bad habits. They will never say you is. Why? Because you are always saying you are, and they are always repeating you are, you are. So that's why. Then learn rapidly. Well, I don't know how rapid, but they learn rapidly. Let's say this is I mean rapid for whom? Okay, so you have to be very careful. Rapidly, yes, but there are many people who say they takes long. It takes long because they are guessing. Authentic material available, of course, this is recommended. Okay, the authentic material available. So why authentic? Because there's an American speaking, there's a Britain speaking, usually in this case Americans only, because this is the American language course. So Americans, but not only that, authentic material, it refers to maybe journals, maybe newspapers, okay, the original sources. That's why authentic. Of course, some disadvantages. For example, it's longer to assimilate. Why is longer? Because they are guessing, always guessing. That's why in my explanation in Spanish, I explain the grammar and voc just for them to take advantage of the time. Once they understand the grammar and vocabulary, they go immediately to their exercises and answer them, and to their listening, and that's good for them. I mean, just trying to help. No reading practice. They don't have any reading practice. I mean, they have some reading, but not compared to listening and speaking. Of course, no writing practice. Ultimately, failure to fluency. Okay, at the end, they might be having a failure to fluency, or they fail to be fluent. They don't have any model to follow when they are speaking by themselves. Always guessing meanings. I told you, always guessing. I don't want them to guess. So that's why I explain them in Spanish. The 30 books, they are in my channel. So they are the 30 books plain in Spanish. I don't want them to guess. I mean, we are not children to learn as if we were children. So we have to take advantage of our schemata. Well, then, guess what? Then comes Noam Chomsky, and he rejects this approach. Okay, he said no audiolingual method. His theory of transformational grammar, you see, he's got a theory, and it refers to transformational grammar. And it says that language is creative. And I agree, of course. I agree with everything, because they are not saying, I mean, they are not telling lies. Language is creative, we know that, and it's generated. It's not a habit. You know that? Language is creative and it's generated. It's not a habit, but guess what? Guess what, Noam Chomsky? The audiolingual method, it was very useful at that time because they needed their soldiers to speak very quickly and to understand very quickly. So that's why they didn't have the time to be creative and to generate their language. So it's got their reasons why this audiolingual method is as such. Uh, of course, it's not a habit. but that was good for them at that time. Language derived from innate aspects of the mind and from how humans process experience through language. Of course, I told you, we have some schemata right now, even some filters, linguistically speaking, some filters which, kind of prevent us from learning, and of course they can help us to learn. The final conclusion of this is that audiolingualism holds that language learning is like other forms of learning. That is the reason why it stresses the mechanistic, stresses the mechanistic aspects of language learning and language use. So just for you to know and to remember that this is the mechanistic. That's why your students will be repeating and repeating in class. And just for you to have an answer, whenever you are asked why the students are always, depending on the teacher, because they have to depend on the teacher. Why? Because this is the audiolingual method. But of course, please, if you are a teacher, use your imagination and combine these methods. Combine it, please, because otherwise it becomes very boring. So please help your students, combine your methods. This is audiolingual, of course, but complement with other methods. And I know you can do that. So please, although this is mechanistic, try to do something else. Try to do something else for your students to be or become motivated. Okay, so that's all. Y como les dije anteriormente, esto es por si te ponen a dar clases, este método, el ALC es un método audiolingual porque tienes hasta un laboratorio, necesitas mucho audio, por eso audiolingual. Tu examen final, que es una ALCPT, tiene 60 preguntas de audio. ¿Qué quiere decir? Que es muy importante el audio. No nada más la explicación o que ellos se aprendan una lista de verbos o una lista de oraciones. No, tienen que aprovechar el listening, los ejercicios de audio que llevan estos libros. Así es que, por favor, si eres el teacher, consigue todos los audios porque eso es de gran ayuda para los estudiantes. Este no es otro método, no es comunicativo, este realmente no es Suggestopedia, no es Silent Way. Puedes usarlos, por supuesto. ¿Y qué crees? Que se llama el método ecléctico. Ecléctico es cuando tú combinas de otras metodologías, otros métodos, ¿no? Que vienen dentro de los approaches, los combinas de tal manera que el único beneficiado sea tu estudiante. Eso es lo que buscamos, que sea tu estudiante. Entonces, espero que esto te sirva y vamos a seguir compartiendo a lo mejor la forma de que un estudiante podría aprender mejor, quizá no más rápido, mejor. Más rápido no, hay procesos que no puedes alterar. Sin embargo, verifica el canal, tiene algo que te puede servir si te pusieron a dar clases. Tiene la gramática explicada porque en ocasiones no puedes explicarlo ni en español ni en inglés. Quizá te pueda yo dar un poquito de ayuda con esa explicación que viene en mi canal. Y suscríbete para darle fuerza al canal. Suscríbete, es muy bueno para todos nosotros. Tenemos que ser un equipo fuerte. Eso nada más es mi intención personal. No es en forma oficial, es mi interés personal, es mi contribución de mí para ti. Y nos vemos en la próxima. No claudiques, vamos juntos.